Good afternoon. I'm Jasmine. Thank you for watching Once and Often. Joining me today is a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a mentor, an entrepreneur, a motivational speaker. She runs a nonprofit organization called Unashamed. She is a child of God, and most importantly, well, not most importantly, but she's also the author of Everyone Will Know It Was God. Hi, Sana. How are you?
I am so good. How are you? I'm so excited to join you today.
Oh, I am elated. I am like over the moon. Thank you so much for joining me today. So, Sana, you are a former foster youth adoptee,
Yep.
and a lot of your story is written here in this book.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you watching, this book is a must read.
Mhm.
A must read. Her life started not when her life started, but her foster care experience started very early in life. Is that correct, Sana?
Very.
Sana,
Yep. 4 years old.
4 years old. And from the first page of this book, you feel the intensity of what she went through beginning at the age of 4. Sana, take me back to your early years and what was covered in this book because I don't want to give anything away. But if you all are readers and if you all want to hear a true testimony, this book is a must read, and it's titled Everyone Will Know It Was God for a Reason. Because as you read this book and as you listen to her story, there's no way she's still sitting here with us today. Everyone will know it was God. So, Sana, let's go back to 4 years old. Let's talk.
Let's talk. So it's so interesting because I wrote that book in 2020 during the pandemic. And at that time, there was still parts of my story that I did not know. I was still looking for family members, and so there's so many parts of it that I didn't get to include in there. And so people keep asking me, "When are you going to write part two?" And I haven't gotten around to it. But at 4 years old, I entered the foster care system because I had been being sex trafficked by my mother and my grandmother, my biological mother and grandmother. And I have a twin brother. And so fortunately, he wasn't also enduring the sex trafficking. He had the opportunity to live with my biological uncle, my maternal, my mother's only maternal sibling. And so he kind of lived there, but they kept me because they were sex trafficking me. And so eventually we go to a doctor's appointment, regular physical checkup that you go to every year. Our uncle took us to the physical because although my mother was addicted to drugs, my grandmother was, my uncle was also addicted to drugs, but he was more functioning. So a lot of the things that needed to be done to basically keep DCF, which is Department of Children and Families, from kind of being in our business, it was his responsibility to do because he was functioning. So he took us to this doctor's appointment for the physical. The doctor did my brother's physical first. Everything went fine. He then got to me to do my physical, and when he went to touch me, I began to scream. So, of course, this alerted him. It was kind of a red flag for him. He called in a female nurse, and the female nurse began to ask me questions and to do the exam. And I revealed to her at that point that I had been being touched by men, and they proceeded to run some tests on me. I came back with a sexually transmitted disease at the age of 4. And so, of course, DCF was called, the police were called, and thus began my journey in the foster care system.
Oh my God. Okay. I need a minute because as much as you uncovered in this book, that part
It's
was not in.
not in there.
At 4 years old,
4 years old.
So you experienced trauma at 4 years old. The average 4 year old is not able to sit with someone and say, hey, this is happening to me. I don't like the way it feels. My mom is this, my grandmom is this, and my uncle is this. The average 4 year old is not able to articulate that. And so naturally, you had to just deal with it and just deal with it and deal with it. And then you go to the doctor to find out what you probably didn't even know at 4 years old what an STD was.
Right. Right.
Oh,
Hmm.
okay. And so at that time, you were placed in foster care.
I was placed into a foster home right in the same town that I lived in, which is Bridgeport, Connecticut. That's my hometown. So I was placed in a foster home not too far from where my mom and family actually live. The home that we were placed in was the home of a pastor and a first lady. So they were just starting a church. They were actually having church in the basement of the home. That's how new it was. There were other children there. We were the only foster children at the time, but some of their other children they had fostered and adopted. And so there were other children that were there, some quite a few years older than us, but one that was very close in age, only a year difference, literally not even a year, maybe days difference. Than us in age. And for the most part, the home, I mean, all of our basic needs were taken care of. We were fed, we weren't necessarily abused. It was very strict, very structured. Wasn't a lot of like nurturing and things like that. We did church a lot. That was the focus. And for the most part though, it was a safe environment. Definitely complete opposite from what I was used to. And we were there from age 4 to age 8.5. I thought they were going to be the family that was going to adopt us. That was the plan. But unfortunately, um, they ended up getting a divorce. The pastor had an affair, and so they got divorced. And then, not too long after that, my foster mother had a stroke, and that kind of was like it. There was no way that she was going to be able to adopt us in that condition and what she was kind of experiencing. And so there were times when, now because the dynamic of the house changed, we and she had medical appointments and things like that, respite care was now introduced. And so respite care, for those that don't know, is a home that's also been licensed by the Department of Children and Family to be able to take care of children that are in DCF custody. But they do this on like a temporary need or as needed. It really is designed to give the foster family some sort of rest, or if there's a family vacation they don't want to take the foster kids on, you can go to a respite home for that time. And so we had some time where we were in respite care, which was a family that our family kind of got to know pretty well. And during that time, while there, I was being molested by the son of the respite care home. By this point, I had learned how to advocate for myself and my brother through the years, because when we were placed into care, my brother almost went mute. Like he stopped talking. And so the only time he would talk is if he would whisper in my ear what he needed, and I kind of became his voice. And so because of that, I really took on the role of like a mother for him. And I felt like at a young age, I felt like it was my job to protect not just him, but both of us.
Mhm.
And so when the molestation started, I told my social worker. And so, of course, she stopped the respite care, but that also put the fire under her to get us adopted.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's a lot to unpack. So you went from being trafficked in
Mhm.
the custody of your mom and your grandmother to being placed in another home where you were being molested.
Right.
So you figure this started very early and led up to roughly 8 years old and after.
Hmm.
And now you went from the custody of your mom and your grandmother to complete strangers to
Yep.
now have to be placed in another home or a safe place, so to speak, for a third time.
For a third time.
And
I will say most children that you meet in foster care will tell you being in one foster home is like unheard of. Most
Yeah.
children in foster care are moved around to many homes
Yep.
before they are adopted, or they eventually are just um age out of care.
Yeah.
For me, thankfully, when I look at my story and I think of how God had his hand on my life, even in the midst of all the things that I went through, I have to be thankful for that. That wasn't my story. I was only in one foster home. And from that foster home, my family that ended up adopting us while I was going through everything that I was going through in this foster home, they were across the state in another town, um, at their own church, having enrolled into what is called the Queen Esther program here in Connecticut. And that program is designed for churches, specifically black churches, to get more foster families and adoptees to get licensed. And so they were going through that program. My adopted father was actually also adopted. And so that's kind of where the adoption piece came from. They already had one biological son together, and then my adopted father had multiple kids, older kids from a previous relationship that were older. And so, but together, he and my mother only had one a biological child, and then they decided to adopt. And so they looked through a book, and they decided to adopt. Initially they were only looking for a girl. They wanted to adopt a daughter. But I say they fell in love with me, and my brother and I were a package deal,
Yeah.
so they ended up taking both of us.
Whew. Well, thankfully, they were able to adopt and I want to say stop some of the abuse that you had experienced from your early years up until that point. Was there ever a moment where you felt anger, say, towards your mother and your grandmother for being the reason why you had to experience this with your brother?
No,
No?
I never felt anger. I think because I was too young to understand that what happened to me was not normal. Like, I had nothing to compare it to. It just was my life. And so I never felt angry. In fact, during the time we were still in foster care, because we were not at that point, my biological mother had not yet had her rights terminated. So while we were in foster care, even though she was now in prison, we still had visits with her. So we would go to the prison and visit her, on the weekends. And we would go to the DCF office and visit my biological grandmother. Like, her rights weren't terminated, and for whatever reason they still had access to us even after the fact that I was sex trafficked. So I still had relationship with my mom in some instance, and I just never saw her as evil or what did you do. Maybe just because I was so young, it just never registered to me that, like, this is wrong and this is not how kids should be raised. When we got placed into our adopted home, we were there for about a year before the adoption was finalized. So we were there for about a year. My adopted home, they were great. They were Christians as well. I had my own room for the first time. I had tons of toys. They enrolled us in a Catholic school, so we had good schooling. Again, very structured, very strict. My mother was not a nurturer at all, but we were well taken care of. Family vacations, all the things. I had my first ever birthday party, when I was 8 and a half year, 8 going on 9. There was the first time I ever understood what a birthday party was. And so they were good people. But it came to a point where now it was time to finalize the adoption. And so we get to the courthouse, and we stand before the judge, and the judge asks my brother and I, do we want to be adopted? And my brother was just standing there because he just as I mentioned, he really wasn't one that did a lot of talking for himself. He kind of looked to me to make those decisions. But I remember having what it felt like an hour of a conversation in my head where I was really weighing what it meant to be adopted.
Mm.
Because at this point, now my mother's rights had been officially terminated in order to move forward with the adoption. DCF decided there was no chance of rehabilitation for her, and there would be no reunification for us. And so her rights had been terminated. My social worker always explained everything to me. She talked to me like I was an adult, even though I was a child. She always made sure I understood this is what's happening and this is why. And so by the time we got to that point at standing in front of the judge, in my head, I'm like, if I say yes, like there's no chance that we get to go back with our mom. And I still had a glimpse of hope that she would get it together. And so for me to say I want to be adopted, it was final. That's what I felt like. I was turning my back on my mom and I was going to move forward. But then I also didn't know what it meant if I said no. Does that mean we go back into care? Like what happens? So I made the decision in that moment to say yes. I don't know if I would have said no if it would have stopped anything, to be honest with you. But the judge asked the 8-year-old Sana, and I felt like that decision was a huge weight on me. And so I made the decision to say yes. And so our adoption was finalized. They offered us the opportunity to change our entire name if we wanted to. We chose to not change our first names, but we did change our middle names and our last names. And yeah, and so at that point, we were officially adopted.
Wow. And so you were the 8-year-old making the decision to say, yes, I want to be adopted, not realizing what impact that would have on your life as well as your brothers, because now you are the big sister who had to speak for yourself at 8 years old, and then your brother at 8 years old, and say, yes, this is the decision that I am making as an adult, as 8-year-old Sana. And yep, this is it. Let's take it from here.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a shirt, and on your shirt, the back of it says, because I saw your Instagram post where it says, people are going to think you were crazy. And on the
Yep.
back of your shirt, it says, I was molested. I think the front says, God, something, God got me through something. And then on the back, it says, I was molested. Now, I read the front, but the words that stood out, of course, was the shirt, the writing on the back that said I was molested. And so I'm listening to you tell the story of being trafficked and then being molested and then going from one home to another and having to make this decision. And then I also saw a post where you said you were removed from therapy because you threw a glass chair. I mean, a chair through a glass window.
Yep.
So how do you sit here and with the confidence and with the courage and the strength and everything that you have in you, speak so eloquently about this story, a traumatic story? Let me add that, a very traumatic story. What gives you the strength to tell this story in the way that you're able to tell it?
God. My faith in God literally is the only thing that allows me to do it. Honestly, there's so much that I have, endured. You would think that being adopted, going through all that is like the worst of it, but it got worse, as years went on, and that trauma shows up. It shows up. And so things got a lot worse. But one thing that I realized is through all of the worst, even though I had been introduced to God, through my foster parents and then, continued on with my adopted family, I didn't really know like God. I didn't really have a real relationship. But one thing I knew is that there was always somebody with me. So when I was being molested, I was thinking about this last week. When I was being molested, I remember being on my back on the floor in the bedroom, being molested and looking up at the ceiling and like God was speaking to me saying, "You're going to be okay. I'm with you." Like, I remember that. I could feel his presence. And so for me, I clung on to that my whole life. And when I look back on it now, I realize like he was literally with me every step of the way. And a lot of it is because I could get up here and cry, and trust me, y'all, I've had many moments where I've had to cry and ask God, why me? Why so hard? Why does this keep happening? Why? And there's a lot of healing work that I've had to do without a therapist. Without a therapist. A lot of healing work that I did between me and God. But the purpose for everything I went through and the importance and urgency of me to get healed and to understand my mother's story, to understand that my biological mother was sex trafficked by her mother, to know that this was a generational thing, to know that my mother had her first experience with drugs at the age of 12, and being incarcerated started at the age of 13, to know that she didn't know what it meant to live a normal life as a child. How could I put such expectation on her to have raised me any differently than what she knew?
Yeah, that's so you gave her grace.
A
Um
lot of.
yeah, because you realized that it was your grandmother who gave her this lifestyle, and naturally she probably thought it was okay. She gave you this lifestyle, not realizing that it was not normal. That takes a lot, because even listening to you, I'm fighting tears. So I can only imagine what your pillows probably look like at night, because I don't understand as I'm speaking with you now, even though I read this book. And ladies and gentlemen, please know this is a good book. It speaks a lot to what Miss Sana is talking about with us today. She shares a lot of personal experiences, most that would take us out. And even what she's sharing with us today is not in the book, but the book enough is enough to humble you,
Mhm.
and just help you to understand that grace has to be given. So you cut out the middleman of a therapist and you went directly to God.
Yep.
And my assumption is that you likely laid before him and was like, I don't know what to do, how to do it. Please talk to me here and now. And you had to have plenty of those nights, because how you were able to speak. And I mean, I see you on Instagram and how you hold other adult women. Now being a mother of your own and a grandmother and a wife, because all of those things will naturally affect you in other relationships. But you are able to sit here. Hmm, it gets
Mhm.
good. And say, no, everyone will know it was God, because it could not have been anyone else to carry you through these traumatic experiences. Because in the book, I understand you became a teenage mom. Is that correct?
Yep, I became a teenage mother. A lot of that was just looking for love in all the wrong places. You know, normal. A lot of women have that story. And becoming a teen mom and still battling in an identity crisis, not knowing who I really am, where I really come from, and just really searching to be loved and to belong somewhere and belong to someone. So there was a lot of that in my life. I think for me, it's important to be able to sit in my truth and tell my story the way I tell it, because I need people to hear all of it.
Yeah,
And while I could sit here and cry through it and tell you, it is more impactful for me to effectively communicate what most people would consider impossible.
absolutely.
Impossible. And for
Absolutely.
people to understand that if I can do it, I'm telling you, you can. There's a strength inside of us that comes alive when we have to survive.
I'm listening to you, but I don't know if I would ever have the strength to speak the way you are. I'm I'm seriously not understanding how you were able to do this while all of this was happening. Did you have any idea who your biological father was?
So no. The funny thing is I never even thought about a father. For so many years, my focus was always on my mom. I never thought about a father. And it wasn't until about 12 years ago that I started saying, hold on, it took two people to
Right.
create you. So where is your father? When I pulled my adoption records, there was no information on my father. There was the birth certificate was left blank. There was nothing. When I asked some of my maternal family members that I still had some sort of contact with, who my father was, no one knew. And at some point, it felt like people were kind of hiding stuff from me, like they were lying, which fueled me to find out who my father was. So I went through a lot of trying to, doing the ancestry DNA test, the
20.
123 me, 23andMe, all those tests, and I wasn't getting anywhere. And I ended up a TV show reached out to me. They were interested in my story. We went under contract for them to locate my dad. And after about a year, and they thought they were pretty close. The Lord told me to reach out to them this was in 2020, and ask them to release us from the contract.
Mm.
And I'm like, Lord, why would I do that? Like, this is my only chance. And he said, tell them to release you from the contract. So I reached out. They agreed to release us from the contract. And at that point, I released the book, which was something that the Lord had been telling me to do for a long time. And I just refused to sit down and endure the process of what writing a book would make me feel and what it would uncover. And so I was being disobedient for a long time. So eventually in 2020, I felt this pressure that if I didn't write this book, it was like I wouldn't be able to breathe. That's how I felt, like there was a stack of bricks on my chest and I couldn't breathe. So I sat down and I wrote that book in 7 months. Released the book in October for my birthday, October of 2020. I released the book, and um, shortly after that, I was contacted by a genealogist. They inboxed me on Facebook and they're like, listen, we heard of your story. We'd love to help you. And so I was like, first I was a little sketchy, like, who are you? But the Lord was like, you can trust him. And so we began to communicate. He lives in Georgia, and we began to, I'm sorry, not in Georgia, in Texas. We began to communicate. I gave him all the information that I had, gave him access to my ancestry account, all the things. And he said, you have like no information. This could probably take at least a year. And I'm like, well, it is what it is. I've waited this long. I don't have anything to lose. Do you know, by December of that same year, so about 4 months later, 4 or 5 months later, he reached out to me. I was on a webinar. I was teaching a webinar to a group of women, and my phone started dinging, dinging, dinging. And so I'm looking down at my phone, and it was the genealogist, and he's sending me all these photos. And he's like, this is your grandmother. He sends me another photo, and he says, one of these men are your father. One is uncle. A few are uncles, but one is your father. And I'm on the webinar and I'm getting these messages. And so I literally was like, hold on, y'all.
Right.
Like, we need to end this, and I will get back to you. And I called him and he said, listen, I found your family. He said, and I made contact with one of your uncles. He said, I don't know if he's your father or he's your uncle, but, I told him what's going on. And he basically said, he needs to process this, and he would get back to me tomorrow. And so this was, the day before. This was December 30th, 2020. And I remember going to sleep that night, and I said, God, you can do anything. It is we are going on the last day of the year, but you can do anything. And I just remember praying for that man and saying, I pray that you touch his heart, God. I pray that he knows that I'm not trying to ruin his family. Like, Lord, please, please, open his heart. And the next morning, my husband came in the house because he worked third shift, and I filled him in on what's happening, and I said, but I believe that God could turn this whole thing around today. It's the last day of the year. He could turn this whole thing around. And I fell back asleep, and I woke up probably 2 hours later, and my phone had like 20 messages from my genealogist. So I called him back, and he said, the man wants to talk to you. And I said, well, I need to know, is he my father? Because if he's not my father, then what's the point? And he
Right.
said, he won't tell me anything. He will only talk to you. So I said a quick prayer, and I called him, the gentleman, and he said, Sana, I need you to know that you belong to us. And I just broke down in tears. And as we continued to talk, he let me know that he was my uncle. He's not my father. He went on to let me know my father passed in the 90s. He
Mm.
had AIDS, just like my mother did, and he passed in the 90s. And they knew nothing about me and my brother. Had no clue that we existed. Did not know. But when they looked at the pictures, and they, obviously our DNA matched and all the things, and he was like, he knew that it was, that we were theirs, that we belonged to them. And I found out I had two older brothers that were 10 years older than me. My entire biological family lives in North Carolina. And so I later learned, my father initially was my mother's drug dealer. They ended up in some type of relationship, and she got pregnant, and then she was going to have an abortion. She wanted to have an abortion because us she didn't want what happened to her to happen to me. So that's why she was going to have an abortion, but her mother convinced her to keep it. But she told my father that she had an abortion, so he never knew that we existed, and he ended up going to jail to do fed time. And then when he got out, he just went back to North Carolina. And so there was never any more conversation. My mother went to jail. We got in foster care, adopted, and that was that. And so, yeah, so it's been great. They have been everything that I have needed my entire life. My family, my father's family. It feels almost like they've been a part of my life forever. But I do have lots of moments when I realize like I missed out on so much, and not having them. And I think that is what I am grappling with in this leg of the healing journey, is just feeling, I live in Connecticut, so we're miles apart. I don't get to see them as often. There's a lot of family events that I miss because I'm not there. But and I have a strong desire to just move to North Carolina, but I know that the Lord has a work for me to do here in Connecticut. And so that is why I'm still here. But that is definitely the area that I am healing in now, is the loss of still being fatherless, when I thought that finding my father's family would heal that completely.
So, oh my God. This, I did not expect this to be this heavy. Let me just say that. I'm serious, because this could have gone on from generation to generation to generation. You at some point decided this stops here, from
Yeah.
being sexually assaulted very early to being molested to them being placed in foster care, becoming a teenage mom. You were even held at gunpoint at one point in time,
Hmm.
um, based on what I read in your book, which could have led to another sexual assault. I want everyone to understand what it is that she experienced. And then at the cool age of 41, you are still healing, growing up fatherless, and you are still healing. So the healing doesn't stop.
Nope. I am still healing every day. I am finally back in therapy. I literally just started therapy last week. Um, and I am excited about what therapy is going to do for me and the journey it's going to take me on and the levels of healing that is going to come from this. But I am just grateful to God that he gave me the strength
Yes.
to get this far in my right mind, and to now be able to be on this journey of healing and therapy in a place where I'm not angry.
When you say that you can be in a place where you're not angry, I applaud you for that because that takes courage like none other. And I don't know if I will ever be able to do that. Even in your book, you stated that after you were held at gunpoint
Mhm,
and that the sexual assault that was getting ready to take place,
mhm,
you heard the voice of another gentleman sometime after that who
mhm.
stopped this assault from happening.
Yep.
You never thought at any point in time to be vindictive. Like, was there ever a get back? Like, oh, you're going to get it. Was there ever any of that in you? Or did you ever just believe the Lord said, vengeance is mine, God, you got it from here. I'm not going to worry about it. Because how do you overcome? And I mean, this is truly a story of overcoming because how do you do that? And I mean, your faith in God obviously is the thing that carried you over. But for those of us, myself included, who have not quite gotten to that point yet where it's like, all right, God, you got it. What do you say to the young ladies that you mentor, to the young ladies that you wrap your arms around, to those who are fostered, molested, victims of sexual assault? What do you say to them so that they can see, okay, Masada did it. I got this. What do you say to them? Because this is unreal to me. I'm so serious.
When the home invasion, when I was involved in the home invasion, which was my home that was invaded, when that happened, I was angry. I'm human.
Yep.
I was angry. I absolutely wanted to get my licks back. I
Yep.
wanted people to pay for it. That situation was devastating for me. Um, and I didn't know where to even start with getting vengeance in that situation because, they had masks on. I just didn't know where to start. And so I was absolutely angry. I was angry that I now felt unsafe to even live in this apartment and was not in a position to just up and get another apartment. So where do I go? Where do I take my son? Like, it was a lot of anger and questions and just all type of stuff. um During that time, the gentleman that so there was two gentlemen that were, one of them was trying to rape me during the home invasion, and another gentleman that was there stopped him from doing that. And so probably weeks to a month or so later, I'm at my apartment one day and I'm cleaning out the apartment because I never stayed there again after that happened, but I had to clean out the apartment. So I'm there and I'm cleaning out the apartment one day, and this guy walks across. He walks. I lived in the projects. He's just walking down the sidewalk, and he spoke to me. He said, "Hey, hey, how you doing?" And when he said that, um I kind of sat straight up because I recognized that voice. And so I said, "Let me get you something to drink." And I ran in the house and I got him a soda or something, and we sat on my porch on the stoop. And he was like, "Oh, you're moving?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm moving." And we just kind of had this little brief conversation. And as I'm still listening to the voice, I'm trying to figure out, why does it sound so familiar to me?
The connection, right.
And then I realized that he wasn't the man that tried to stop the rape. He was the man that was going to rape me. And so in that moment, like I felt the Lord come over me, because now I'm battling with anger. Like, okay, now he's sitting right next to me on my stoop. What do? Right? This is the moment you've been waiting for. You've been wanting vengeance. He's right here. It's almost nobody else outside but us, because there was like a big parade in the neighboring town. So most people were gone. So it's like anything could have happened and nobody would have known, right? So my mind is racing, but I felt the Lord say, vengeance is mine. I wasn't in the church at that time. I wasn't going to church every Sunday. I wasn't reading my word. I wasn't even praying every day. But I'm telling y'all that the Lord was just with me. I just can't explain it. He just was with me. And so he got up to leave. And I said something like, I forgive you.
Mm.
I don't know where that came from. Because
Oh,
the flesh side of me
right, right.
was not forgiving you.
See, and that's where, as you were unpacking and moving out, see, Jasmine would have been looking for the hammer. I know I got a hammer around here somewhere because this is how this is about to go down. I promise you, I'm not this is. I'm not. So the fact that you even offered him something to drink and sat
Mm-hmm.
and had a moment with the guy who was so close to adding another layer of hurt and trauma to your life. You sat in the moment with him, had conversation,
Yep,
offered him something to drink, and said, I forgive you. You have to be God's only angel because I don't know anyone
that
who would
could do.
absolutely respond that way.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. And that's why I know it was the Lord. And I say to people, like, I believe the Lord loves everybody, right? He loves all his children, but he stand on business when it comes to me.
Yeah.
It's just something that I can't explain, but I know what I know. And you would have to live my life to truly understand it, because there's been many of instances like that have happened. Now, what I will also say is, if you ask me if the man is still alive today, he's not.
Mhm.
Not at my hands. He's
Right.
not alive at my hands, but he's not alive today.
Right.
And so, and I am not in jail.
Right.
So,
Right.
and no one that I love is in jail
Yeah.
behind that.
Yep.
So, I know that the Lord got vengeance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Period. You know?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so I have to be okay with that. I have to be okay with that. And I have to know that, all things work together for the
Mhm.
good. And
Yep.
so in that situation, it was a wake-up call for me as well, that, girl, you out here living a crazy life. You're living a crazy life, and you have a whole 1-year-old son. You need to figure out what you're going to do. And so it was definitely a wake-up call for me.
Yeah, it was definitely because there's so much more in the book that you readers, you just have to read the book to see everything that we just discussed. There's so much more in the book that she experienced and that she endured, that on top of what she just shared with us, you would still look at other circumstances and be like, wait, this happened on top of what I just heard. You absolutely have to hear this and read it. And it created almost like a connection between me and you. Not that I didn't experience any of that or anything close to it in life, but to see that you're able to sit here now, you have a beautiful family. Obviously, God has his hand on you. If he doesn't touch anybody else, he has touched you in ways where you know that you are safe. And I can't even imagine that it started at 4 years old and led up to so many. You've gone through so many circumstances that really could have left you in the same predicament as the young man who was so close to sexually assaulting you.
Right.
You could have been dead from what
Mhm.
I read in this book. You could have. And if we're being honest, there were so many situations where you probably should have, but God had his hand on you, because when I read this book from the first page, I could not put this down. So when you say everyone will know it was God, there's nothing else to say to that. There's no other reason you're able to sit with me today and say, yep, this happened to me. Yep, I'm going through therapy. Yep, this happened. Yep, 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 because there's so much more. And even though this book is a good read and it's a quick read, I'm sure there's so much more that on top of what you just shared with us, still you have not processed and spoken of. And I just
Absolutely.
cannot believe it.
Absolutely. It's you asked me what would I say to other people that are in this situation or have experienced these things. Um and the truth is I just tell them my full story, because at the other side of all of that, I'm in my right mind. I'm still here. I am successful, and I'm doing the work to help other people,
Yeah,
and to help other foster youth. And I know that I had to go through every single thing that I went through in order to do the work that I do right now. So I sat last night in a room with foster kids that are teenagers, that some of them been incarcerated and just different things. And I was able to share about myself having lived in the projects, having been the victim of a home invasion, and it connected with them.
of course.
If I didn't go through that stuff, I would miss a whole generation of people that God called me to. And so I have to understand that my life is bigger than me. It's bigger than me. He gave me the strength to be able to get through it, and it's supernatural. Sometimes it don't even feel real. I have many days where I lay in the bed and I think about my life, and I chuckle, because I'm like, girl, how? Like, how did that? How are you still? Like, I ask myself that. How are you still here? But I'm telling you, we all have a story, we all have a journey, but you have to hold on to a higher power,
Yeah.
because if you don't, you will not make it through this life.
It's so true. And the reason why your work is so impactful and why I enjoy watching you on Instagram and even the time that you're able to sit with me today is because so often when you tell someone, oh, I know it's hard, people will ask, how do you know?
Mhm.
But you are not one that can say, I know it's hard and not have an answer to when they ask, how do you know? Because you actually lived through these moments that could have, would have, should have taken you out. So it creates a different connection between you and the other youth that are wondering, is my mom going to do the right thing? Is she going to come back? Is dad, ever going to come around? Is mom ever going to be released from prison and become the mom that she should be for us? Like all of those things. So when you say, I know what you're going through, it's kind of like the loss of a parent, a sibling, or a loved one, a spouse. Oh, I know what you're going through, but your spouse is still living. And so for this work
Right.
that you're doing with the youth, and when you tell them, I know what it is you're going through because I went through this. And on Instagram, you are Sana Latrice, the storyteller. Sana Latrice,
Yep.
storyteller, right? So you tell your story. And I said this before. Another lady that I know, she always says, our stories are not for us. For you to have gone through what you've gone through, I mean, I just have chills running through my body as I listen to you. And I just can't even believe that you were able to sit here and speak in this moment like, yep, this happened to me. And for the assault that was so close to taking place, for
Mhm.
you to be able to offer this young man something to drink and share a conversation with him. Whew, that right there is heavy. And it's like, and to know that this all started at 4 years old for you, I just cannot believe. What has it been like for your brother? How is he?
So my brother has struggled a lot, and I think it's important to really understand how trauma affects different people. And so for me, the trauma that we endured, I kind of took it, and it grew me. It grew me, it hardened me, it strengthened me, a lot of things. But for my brother, it showed up just in different ways. And so at the age of 15, he ended up going to prison, and he did 10 years in jail at the age of 15. He lost his entire teenage life, his young adult life, where we are learning how to navigate systems and situations and, going to school and all those things. He lost all those years. And so he obviously is my age because we're twins, we're both 41, but mentally, in the way he lives his life, he's still very much a teenager.
Yeah. Yeah. I was watching a show one time, and one of the lines in the show was, when we experience trauma, it's at that age that we stop growing.
Yeah.
And, I said this when I spoke with someone earlier this week. We get older, but that doesn't mean we grow up. And
Right.
for him to have experienced trauma at such an early age, um, unless he has therapy, the right therapy, or that relationship with God that you have, he will likely remain in that state, unfortunately. And it's so unfortunate because this is not a life that he asked for. He
Right.
was dealt, he was dealt a bad hand,
Bad hand.
and unfortunately never dealt with that. And so as a result, at the age of 41, he's still living with that. Is that safe to say?
That's safe to say. He's still living there, and his story's not over, right? And
Right.
God, I've seen God do anything. He could turn his whole life around,
Yep.
in 24 hours if he wanted to.
Yep.
But again, we all have a story, and we all have a choice. And I think that's most important, is that we get to choose how we move through this life. Obviously, struggles and things come your way, but you get to decide how you're going to navigate it. And so he's still navigating. He's
Yeah.
still navigating.
This was, oh my God. I did not expect to feel like this. I knew that this would be intense. I knew that this would be heavy, but you shared some things that you didn't even put in the book. And I mean, guys, for those of you who are watching, you have to follow the sister on Instagram, Sana Latrice. Her story, like she said before we started to record, she is an open book. She's very transparent, and she uses her testimony to help others. And the reason why that's important is because so many of us are not courageous enough to say, I dealt with this. We carry guilt, we carry shame, the embarrassment of everything that she went, because there's some things that I can't give away from this book, from how she bounced around and things like that, just for shelter. There was so many things that she did not touch on. So I want to encourage all of you. This book is on Instagram. Please look at this book. It's on Instagram. And so that Sana and I are not personal friends. I just saw her on Instagram. Her spirit is contagious. And I'm serious, right, Sana? You can let them know. And I was just like, oh, I want to talk to her. And when I saw that you had written a book, I was like, oh, I got to read this. And the book was enough to fill me up. Speaking with you is another, like fill my cup, because I'm just like, I cannot believe you went through this and that you endured and that you are living in a life and in the space where you can absolutely tell your story and help others, because the next Sana who is going through the same situation right now needs someone to look up to, and being there for them and having your nonprofit organization Unashamed. Do you realize the shame that so many of us carry? And like I said to you a moment ago before we started to record, the shame of being an adoptee was what kept me from even talking about my adoption, because I was too embarrassed to talk about something that I had absolutely nothing to do with. And while I was the center of it, I didn't have anything to do with that. I didn't sign any adoption papers or foster care papers or go through being licensed or anything. I was the center of it. But the shame carried of my mother, who had a drug addiction, could not properly care for her kids. And I grew up feeling like, well, I don't want to talk about it because that's embarrassed. And then it became an issue of, you chose drugs in the streets over being a mother. And and that's why I asked you a moment ago, how did you ever feel that resentment or carry any resentment toward her? But you realized that she was dealing with her own trauma, and then that grandma was dealing with her own trauma. But with you, you said it stops here. it stops now. Before I go down this slippery slope, I am going to make the necessary change. And so before we end, because I want to end on a good note, you realize when you walk through the doors of meeting your husband's grandmother that this woman knew you from young Sana at 4, 5, 6 years old. Is that correct?
That is correct. I love my love story because
Yes.
it's over it. But yes, I there's a traumatic situation that I talk about in the book, and the very next day, I had found myself praying like, okay, God, I need some help here. I need some help. And the next day I visited this church and I met who would become my husband that day. But what really solidified it was when he took me home to meet his family, and we knocked on his grandmother's door on Christmas. And when she opened the door, she looked like she seen a ghost. And he went to introduce me, and she said, "I already know her." And he's kind of like babbling, like, "You don't know her, what are you talking about?" And she said, "Hold on." And she ran to her room, and she came back a few minutes later, and she handed me a picture of myself. And that picture was a picture of me when I was in my first foster home. She happened to be friends with my foster parents, and in fact, when they bought their first building, her and her husband, who were also pastors, would rent the space in the afternoon. And during that transition of us leaving and their church coming, she had a picture of me, and she presented that picture back to me. And she had that picture on her mirror in her bedroom for years. And so just to see that picture at that point in my life in 2007, after I had been through so many years of struggle, it was another sign from the Lord to say, "I told you, I got you covered."
That is absolutely amazing to know that it all came full circle. Like the fact that while you were 4 and 5 years old, you don't remember, that who this lady is likely, and and then to see that it came full circle where, oh my God, this is actually my husband's grandmother, and she remembers me from my first foster home.
Yep.
The fact that she would absolutely keep a picture of you in her mirror, because we all know in the black household, we all know what that mirror looked like when you pictures. We have pictures.
Yep.
Exactly. And it just speaks to who God truly is. It really speaks to who God truly is, and not just who he is in the spirit, but who he is to you specifically. Because
Yes.
and even to know how openly you are with your story. I'm sorry, y'all, my brackets are snagging my gums, but to know how open you are with your story, the fact that you found a man, or rather a man found you, who was not able to look at you in judgment, but looked at you and said, "You were going to be my wife," and made you an honest woman, even though you were already a mom yourself. And to know that, yes, I don't care what she's been through, we are going to heal together from here on out. This is my wife. I just can't even believe. I seriously cannot even believe that this is your story. This is amazing. And then, oh gosh, I just can't even believe it.
Yeah.
I can't even believe it. And so I thank you for being Sana Latrice, the storyteller. I thank you for being the mentor that you are. I thank you for being the open book. I thank you for being transparent. I thank you for walking with a spirit of conviction and a spirit of love and a spirit of obedience. I thank you so much for that, because I don't know anyone like that. I personally do not know anyone that can tell their story with grace and love the way that you do. And say, while I am healing, I also want to help others in their healing journey. And I want to help others be unashamed, those who are sexually assaulted and molested. Do you realize the effect that it leaves on young people to endure something like that at such a young age, yet you use your story to empower people and let them know that they don't have to walk with their heads down. I can't believe you. Well, I really can't.
It's my responsibility, but I get, it's something that I get to do every day, and that's what I remind myself, like, you get to do this
Yeah,
every day.
yeah.
And so I'm grateful for that.
Well, we are grateful for you because I'm sure once this video is out and people see who you are and the work that you and your husband are doing in ministry and outside of the ministry, because one thing I always say is real ministry is what you do outside of the church. Every
Hmm.
Sunday after Sunday, it's nothing for us to put on our fine garments and go in church and say hallelujah. But what do you do outside of that? And the work that you show us. It's not like we have to speculate. The work that you show us and what we see on Instagram and how you embrace these young women, I commend you. I commend you. And I'm so, so, so thankful for you because wow, those little girls that you are putting your arms around could very well be myself and my daughters and so many other young ladies. You are doing the work in Connecticut, and it's not just Connecticut because I trust and I absolutely believe that God has a much much bigger assignment for you, and it may be starting in Connecticut, but you are just going to be known worldwide. And I'm just so thankful for even the way that God is using you and for your obedience to Him, because this is big. And our guys, ladies and gentlemen, this book, Sana Latrice, is one that has to be read. It's on Amazon, and you guys, you just have to read it. And so I thank you
Thank
so much for your time. Um, I just thank you so much for your time.